The social worker's knuckles went white as she gripped the steering wheel, staring at the ramshackle ranch house that seemed to lean against the Montana wind like a tired old man. Her supervisor's words echoed in her mind. Just get those kids out of there. The complaints have been piling up for months, but when Garrett Cole stepped onto that weathered porch, his face a roadmap of burned scars that told stories no one wanted to hear, and whispered those 5 desperate words, "Please don't let them take my kids." Away! Something in Rebecca Morrison's carefully constructed professional armor began to crack because the kids weren't what she expected at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Morrison had been a social worker for the Montana Department of Family Services for 11 years, and she'd seen everything, or so she thought. The manila folder on her passenger seat was thin, too thin for a case this serious. 3 complaints in 4 months. Anonymous, of course. They always were in towns like Crossfield, where everyone knew everyone's business, but nobody wanted their name attached to the knowing, unfit guardian. Dangerous living conditions. Children at risk. The words had been stamped in red across the top of the file, and her supervisor, Margaret Chen, had been unusually insistent that Rebecca handle this one personally. "The local sheriff's been asking questions," Margaret had said, her reading glasses slipping down her nose as she reviewed the case. Apparently the man's something of a recluse, keeps to himself. But neighbors have been hearing sounds. Rebecca had pressed for details, but Margaret had simply closed the file and slid it across the desk. "Just do a welfare check. Document everything. If it's as bad as the reports suggest, we'll need to move quickly." Now, as Rebecca's sedan rattled up the unpaved road that wound through 50 acres of Montana wilderness, she was beginning to understand why Garrett Cole might prefer solitude. The land was brutal and beautiful in equal measure. Towering pines gave way to open meadows where the autumn grass had turned the color of old gold. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with October snow. The ranch house appeared suddenly around a bend, and Rebecca's foot instinctively touched the brake. It wasn't the house itself that gave her pause, though it clearly had seen better days. The roof sagged slightly on the left side, and the white paint had weathered to the gray of driftwood. What caught her attention were the fences, dozens of them, paddocks and pens of varying sizes, all meticulously maintained despite the house's obvious neglect. And in those pens, Rebecca squinted, leaning forward over the steering wheel. Were those goats? She counted at least 15 in the nearest paddock alone, their coats ranging from pure white to mottled brown. Beyond them, she could see what looked like sheep, and further still, the distinctive shapes of cattle. She parked near a barn that seemed in better repair than the house, and sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The file had mentioned nothing about livestock. The complaints had been about children, specifically about children living in squalor with a man whose appearance frightened them, whose scarred face and troubled past made him unfit to care for anyone. Rebecca had heard variations of this story before. Sometimes the complaints were legitimate. More often, they came from well-meaning but misguided neighbors who conflated poverty with neglect or difference with danger. She'd learned to keep an open mind, to observe before judging. Still, her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, typing out a quick text to Margaret. "On site. Will report within the hour." The screen showed no signal. Of course not. They were at least 20 miles from the nearest cell tower. Rebecca took a deep breath, grabbed her bag and the folder, and stepped out of the car. The wind hit her immediately, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Wood smoke, she realized, and underneath it, the earthy smell of animals. She'd barely closed the car door when she heard it, a high-pitched bleating, urgent and distressed. It came from somewhere behind the barn, followed by a deeper sound, a voice, low and soothing, though she couldn't make out the words. Rebecca hesitated. Protocol dictated she go directly to the house, knock on the door, identify herself. But that sound, the distress in it, pulled at something deeper than protocol. She rounded the corner of the barn and stopped. A man knelt in the dirt beside a small goat, no bigger than a house cat. The animal was on its side, legs thrashing weakly. And the man, Rebecca had read the descriptions in the file. Severe facial scarring, burn victim. Appearance can be startling, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of Garrett Cole. The left side of his face was a landscape of healed burns, the skin pulled tight and shiny, distorting his features into something that might have frightened children in a storybook. The scarring continued down his neck and disappeared beneath the collar of his worn flannel shirt. His left hand, too, bore the marks of fire, fingers slightly curled, the skin mottled and thick, but his right hand moved with surprising gentleness as he cradled the small goat's head. And his voice was the softest thing Rebecca had heard in years. "Easy now, Clementine. Easy, girl. I've got you. You're going to be just fine." The goat's bleating subsided to a weak whimper. Garrett reached for a syringe that lay in an open first aid kit beside him, drawing clear liquid from a small vial with practiced efficiency. "This is going to help," he murmured, finding a spot on the goat's flank and administering the injection with the care of a surgeon. "Just a little pinch. There we go. That's my brave girl." Rebecca must have made a sound, a shift of gravel beneath her feet perhaps, because Garrett's head snapped up. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent, and in them, Rebecca saw something she recognized from her own mirror on hard days: exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been fighting for too long. "Mr. Cole," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady and professional. "I'm Rebecca Morrison from the Department of Family Services. I'm here to—" "I know why you're here." He turned back to the goat, his scarred hand still gentle on the animal's side. "Knew it was coming eventually. Someone in town's been making calls, spreading stories. He didn't sound angry, just resigned. Give me a minute to stabilize Clementine, and then we can talk." Rebecca watched as he continued working, checking the goat's vital signs with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. The animal's breathing began to even out, and after a few minutes it made a small sound, almost questioning. "That's right," Garrett said softly. "You're okay. Just a bad case of bloat, but we caught it in time." He stroked the goat's head once more, then slowly stood, his movements suggesting old injuries that hadn't healed quite right. When he turned to face Rebecca fully, she had to force herself not to look away from his scars. "So," he said, his voice flat now, the warmth he'd shown the goat completely absent. "Are you here to take them away?" "I'm here to conduct a welfare check," Rebecca replied, pulling out her documentation. "We've received reports of children living on this property in potentially unsafe conditions. I need to—" "Children?" Garrett's laugh was bitter. "Of course. Let me guess, the reports mentioned I'm not fit to care for them? That I'm some kind of monster?" He gestured to his face with his scarred hand. "That this makes me dangerous?" "Mr. Cole, it's the Hendersons, isn't it?" He turned away from her, scanning the property as if looking for someone. "Or maybe the Pratts. They've been trying to buy this land for 2 years. Thought they could scare me off with whispers and rumors." He picked up the first aid kit, cradling the now sleeping goat in his other arm. "Well, come on then. I'll show you the children." He started walking toward a series of pens behind the main barn, his gait uneven but determined. Rebecca followed, her mind racing. The file had been clear: multiple children, ages unknown, living in squalor. But there was no playground equipment, no toys scattered in the yard, no signs of human children at all. Garrett stopped at the first pen and gestured with his scarred hand. "These are the Montgomery twins, Hank and Holly. Found them abandoned on the roadside about 60 miles east of here. Someone dumped them, probably couldn't afford to feed them." He pointed to 2 young calves that immediately trotted over at the sound of his voice, their large eyes curious and trusting. They were malnourished, dehydrated. Holly had an infected wound on her leg. Took 3 weeks of round-the-clock care, but they pulled through. He moved to the next pen without waiting for Rebecca's response. These are the Jackson kids, all 7 of them, seized from a hoarding situation in Billings. The rescue shelter was overwhelmed, scheduled them for euthanasia because they had mange and trust issues. Goats of various sizes crowded the fence, several of them missing patches of fur that were slowly growing back. They're on medication, getting better every day. Pen after pen, Garrett introduced them. Each animal had a name, usually a surname followed by first names, as if they were a family unit. The Wilson children, the Patterson girls, the Rodriguez siblings, all of them rescue animals, most with visible signs of past trauma or ongoing medical needs. There are 43 of them total, Garrett said finally. His voice rough with emotion he was clearly trying to suppress. Goats, sheep, a few cattle, 2 horses, and a donkey named Mr. Peterson who thinks he's a guard dog. He turned to face Rebecca, and in the afternoon light she could see moisture gathering in his eyes. These are my kids. This is my family. And someone in this God-forsaken town has decided that a man who looks like me doesn't deserve to have even this. Rebecca stood there, the wind whipping her hair around her face, staring at this scarred man who'd just upended everything she thought she knew about this case. The manila folder suddenly felt heavy in her hands, heavy with assumptions and prejudice and someone's malicious intent. "Mr. Cole," she began, but he held up his hand. "Before you tell me this was all a misunderstanding, before you apologize and leave, you should know something." He looked out over his property, at the animals that had begun to gather at their fences, as if sensing their caretaker's distress. "I know what people see when they look at me. I know what I look like. There was a fire 7 years ago. I was a firefighter in Spokane, went into a building that was supposed to be empty. Wasn't." He touched his face briefly, unconsciously. "I survived, but my career didn't, my marriage didn't, pretty much everything I'd built didn't." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "When I came out here, bought this place with the last of my settlement money, I wasn't planning to build anything new. I was planning to disappear." A lamb bleated in the distance, and Garrett's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "But then I found Pearl. She's that ewe over there, the one with the limp. Someone hit her with their truck and left her on the side of the road to die. I brought her here, spent 3 days thinking she wouldn't make it. But she did." He looked at Rebecca, and the rawness in his eyes made her chest ache. "After that, I couldn't seem to stop. Every animal I could save, every life I could give a second chance. It felt like maybe I was earning back something I'd lost. What had you lost?" Rebecca asked softly, forgetting for a moment that she was supposed to be conducting an official investigation. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. The belief that someone like me could still do good in the world, that these hands, he held up his scarred left hand, could create something instead of just being a reminder of destruction. He walked over to Clementine, who was now awake and bleating softly from where he'd set her down. He picked her up again, and the small goat immediately nuzzled into his chest, seeking warmth and comfort. "So now you know the truth. There are no human children here. Just a bunch of broken animals and the broken man who's trying to fix them." His voice hardened again. "And if someone's trying to take them away, trying to claim I'm unfit or this place is unsafe, then you should know I'll fight. I'll fight with everything I have because they're all I've got. They're my family now." Rebecca found herself at a crossroads. Everything in her training said she should document what she'd seen, file her report, close the case as unfounded, and drive away. The children in question were livestock, not humans. This wasn't even within her department's jurisdiction, but something about the way Garrett Cole held that tiny goat, the way his voice gentled when he spoke to the animals, the meticulous care evident in every pen and fence, and underneath it all, the palpable fear that someone was trying to destroy the one good thing he'd managed to build from the ashes of his old life. "Mr. Cole," she said, choosing her words carefully, "I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about the nature of this case. but I'd like to better understand what's happening here before I file my report. Would you be willing to show me around? Help me get the full picture?" Garrett studied her face, searching for something, sincerity perhaps, or maybe just the absence of disgust. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him because he nodded slowly. "The full picture? That might take a while. I've got time," Rebecca said, surprising herself with how much she meant it, as Garrett led her toward the barn. Clementine still cradled in his arms, Rebecca pulled out her phone to check the signal again. Still nothing. She was entirely cut off from her office, from protocol, from the world that lay beyond these 50 acres, for reasons she couldn't quite explain. That didn't bother her as much as it should have. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The barn's interior was nothing like Rebecca expected. Where the exterior showed years of weather and neglect, the inside was immaculate. The wooden beams had been reinforced with new lumber, and the floor, though dirt-packed, was swept clean. The air smelled of fresh hay, and that particular warmth that comes from animal bodies gathered together against the cold. But what struck Rebecca most were the stalls. Each one had been modified with careful attention, lower walls for smaller animals, higher ones for the cattle, all with gates that could be secured but opened easily from the outside. Above each stall hung a hand-painted sign with names written in careful block letters, along with what appeared to be medical information, feeding schedules, medication dosages, special care instructions. "This is the ICU," Garrett said, setting Clementine down gently in a stall lined with extra blankets. The small goat immediately curled up, her eyes already drooping. "Any animal that needs intensive monitoring stays here, where I can check on them every few hours. Used to do it from the house, but—" he gestured vaguely toward the residence. "The heating system's better out here. I rebuilt the whole ventilation system last winter." Rebecca walked slowly down the center aisle, reading the signs. "Wilson Sophie, antibiotic cream twice daily for hoof rot. Watch for limping. Patterson May, grain supplement with morning feed. Low weight, target 15 more pounds. Rodriguez Carlos, blind in left eye. Approach from right side only." "You did all this yourself?" she asked, running her hand along a beam that showed expert craftsmanship. "Didn't have much choice. Contractors don't like coming out this far, and the ones that would—" He trailed off, touching his scarred face again in that unconscious gesture. "Let's just say the estimates they gave me were triple what they'd charge anyone else. So I learned. YouTube videos, library books, trial and error." He moved to a stall where a young calf stood on shaky legs. "This is Henderson Daisy. She's got selenium deficiency, makes her weak, uncoordinated. But with the right supplements and patience, she'll be running with her brother by spring." The calf nuzzled Garrett's hand, and he produced a bottle from a nearby shelf, positioning himself so Daisy could drink. The animal's tail began to wag as she fed, and Garrett's expression, softened by the contentment of the animal he was caring for, made the scars on his face seem less prominent, as if the gentleness radiating from him overshadowed the physical damage. "How long have you been doing this?" Rebecca asked, pulling out her notepad more from habit than any official need. "The rescue work, I mean. About 5 years." Garrett kept his eyes on Daisy. "First year after I moved here, I was just existing, barely left the property. Had groceries delivered to the end of the driveway once a month. Didn't talk to anyone. Didn't want to." His voice took on a distant quality, as if he were looking back through a tunnel of time. "Then Pearl happened, and suddenly I had a reason to get up in the morning. Something that needed me." He moved to the next stall, checking a water bucket and refilling it from a hose. "After Pearl, word somehow got around, though God knows how, since I never told anyone. But one day, the sheriff showed up with a box of kittens someone had dumped at the gas station. Said he heard I had space. I told him I didn't do cats, but—" He paused, and Rebecca thought she detected the ghost of a smile. "3 of them are in the house right now. Turns out I do cats, Sheriff Wade Brennan." Rebecca asked, remembering the name from the file. "Yeah, Wade's complicated." Garrett's tone shifted, becoming more guarded. "He brings me animals sometimes. always real apologetic about it, like he's putting me out. But I think he knows. He stopped abruptly, shaking his head. Doesn't matter, but it did matter, Rebecca thought, because Sheriff Brennan's name had been mentioned in the complaints as someone who'd been asking questions about Garrett's property. Yet here was Garrett describing him as someone who brought animals to rescue. The pieces weren't fitting together the way they should. Mr. Cole, who do you think filed these complaints? Rebecca asked directly. Garrett's jaw tightened. Could be a lot of people. The Hendersons, like I said, they own the ranch to the north, always wanted to expand. The Pratts run cattle on leased land to the south, been pressuring me to sell for years. He ran his scarred hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed to pain him. Or it could be someone from town who just doesn't like the idea of someone like me being out here. Crossfield's population is about 300. Everyone knows everyone, and new people, especially new people who look like monsters, make folks nervous. You're not a monster, Rebecca said quietly. Garrett looked at her, then really looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. You should see the way people look at me on the rare occasions I go into town. The way mothers pull their kids a little closer. The way conversations stop when I walk into the feed store. He turned away, moving to another stall. I don't blame them. I know what I look like. You look like someone who survived something terrible, Rebecca said, and she meant it. There's a difference between looking dangerous and looking like you've been through danger. Garrett didn't respond, but his shoulders seemed to lose some of their tension. He opened a cabinet mounted on the wall, revealing a well-organized collection of medical supplies that would rival some veterinary clinics. Syringes, medications, bandages, splints, everything labeled and inventoried with the same meticulous care as the rest of the barn. Do you have veterinary training? Rebecca asked, genuinely impressed. Online courses mostly. Some books. And Dr. Sarah Blackwood. She's the vet in Crossfield. She's been helpful. He selected a bottle of medication, checking the label carefully. She comes out here sometimes, shows me how to do things. Says I've got good instincts. He paused. She's the only person in town who's ever said that. Rebecca made a mental note to contact Dr. Blackwood. If a licensed veterinarian was willing to work with Garrett, that spoke volumes about his competence and character, what happens to the animals after they're healed? She asked. Do you adopt them out? For the first time, Garrett's expression closed off completely. No, never, never. The word was flat, final. He moved past her toward the barn door. They stay here with me. That's the deal. Rebecca followed him back outside, where the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. The animals in the various pens seemed to sense Garrett's presence, and a chorus of bleating, mooing, and other sounds rose up to greet him. But surely some of them are fully recovered, Rebecca pressed, trying to understand. Couldn't they go to good homes, free up space for other animals who need help? Garrett stopped walking and turned to face her, and for the first time she saw real anger flash in his eyes. You think I'm hoarding them? Keeping them here for some sick reason? No, they were thrown away, Ms. Morrison, every single one of them. Dumped, abandoned, abused, scheduled for euthanasia because they weren't convenient anymore, or because fixing them cost too much, or because they weren't perfect enough. His voice rose, emotion cracking through his controlled exterior. And now you're suggesting I should do the same thing. Send them away to good homes that might decide in 6 months or a year that they're too much trouble? That's not what I meant. I made them a promise. He walked over to the nearest fence, where 2 goats immediately came to greet him, their heads butting gently against his hands. When I bring them here, when I save their lives, I promise them they're safe. That this is forever. That nobody will ever throw them away again. He looked at Rebecca, and the raw pain in his eyes made her want to look away. It's the only promise I've been able to keep in the last 7 years. So no, I don't adopt them out. They stay. This is their home. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Rebecca understood suddenly and completely what this place really was. It wasn't just a rescue operation. It was Garrett's own second chance, manifested in every animal he saved. They were broken, and so was he. They'd been rejected, and so had he. In healing them, he was trying to heal himself. "I understand," she said softly. "Do you?" Garrett's voice was bitter again. "Because in about an hour, you're going to get back in your car, drive back to wherever you came from, and write a report about what you saw here. And that report is going to determine whether I lose everything. The animals aren't under my jurisdiction," Rebecca pointed out. "The complaints were about children." "There are no children here. You think that matters?" Garrett laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You think whoever filed those complaints is going to stop just because you close one case? They'll find another angle. Animal hoarding, maybe. Or health code violations. Or they'll claim the property is a nuisance." He gestured broadly at his land. "There's always something. Always a way to take away what you love if someone wants it badly enough." Rebecca wanted to argue, to tell him he was being paranoid. But she'd been a social worker long enough to know he was right. When someone decided you were a problem, they could find endless ways to make your life hell within the legal system. And a man like Garrett, isolated, scarred, with no family or community support, would be an easy target. "Then we need to figure out who's doing this and why," Rebecca said decisively. "Because this?" She gestured at the barn, the pens, the well-cared-for animals. "This is good work, important work. And I'm not going to let someone destroy it because of prejudice or greed." Garrett stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. For all you know, the people complaining have legitimate concerns." "Do they?" Rebecca challenged. "Because everything I've seen so far shows a man who's dedicated his life to caring for animals that no one else wanted, who's learned construction and veterinary medicine and God knows what else just to give them a better life. Who's pouring every resource he has into maintaining this place." She pulled out the thin, manila folder. "And all I have is 3 anonymous complaints, full of vague accusations and prejudiced language. So yeah, I'm inclined to believe you're the victim here, not the problem." The sun caught the scars on Garrett's face, highlighting every ridge and valley of damaged tissue. He looked tired, she thought. Tired and worn down by years of fighting alone. "I don't have money for lawyers," he said finally. "Used the last of my settlement on this place and the animals. I do odd jobs online sometimes. Graphic design, data entry, things I can do from home. But it's barely enough to cover feed and medical supplies." "Then we'll have to be smart about this," Rebecca said, her mind already working through possibilities. "First, I need to file my report, and it needs to be airtight. I'll document everything. The condition of the animals, the quality of care, your medical training and supplies. I'll get a statement from Dr. Blackwood. We'll create a record that shows exactly what this place is and isn't. And then we find out who's trying to hurt you and why. Because I have a feeling this isn't really about the animals at all." Garrett studied her face for a long moment, and Rebecca had the sense she was being evaluated, measured against some internal standard. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, but I want to be clear about something, Ms. Morrison. If this goes sideways, if your help somehow makes things worse, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll help me find homes for them. The animals," his voice cracked slightly. "I can lose this place. I can lose everything I own. But I can't." He stopped, swallowing hard. "They deserve better than to end up back in a shelter or at an auction or worse. So if this all falls apart, if I can't protect them anymore, I need to know someone will." The vulnerability in his voice, the naked fear of failing the creatures who depended on him, struck Rebecca like a physical blow. This was a man who'd already lost everything once. The idea of losing it all again, and watching his animals suffer because of it, was clearly more than he could bear. "I promise," Rebecca said, and meant it. "But it's not going to come to that. We're going to fight this, together." For the first time since she'd arrived, something resembling hope flickered across Garrett Cole's scarred face. It was tentative, fragile, like a candle flame in a strong wind. But it was there. "All right then," he said quietly. "Let me show you the rest of the property. If you're going to help me, you need to see everything." As they walked toward the far pastures, where the horses and cattle grazed in the fading light, Rebecca realized she'd crossed a line. She was no longer just conducting a welfare check or filing a report. She was invested now, personally involved in a way that Margaret Chen would definitely not approve of. But as she watched Garrett Cole greet each animal by name, as she saw the way they responded to his voice and his touch, despite his fearsome appearance, Rebecca knew she'd made the right choice. Sometimes, she thought, the most important thing a social worker could do wasn't follow protocol. It was recognize when someone needed an advocate, a defender, a witness to their worth, and Garrett Cole, for all his scars and isolation, was worthy of being fought for. The question was, who were they fighting against? And how far would that enemy be willing to go? The sun had nearly touched the mountain peaks when Rebecca heard the sound of truck engines rumbling up the dirt road. Garrett heard them too. His entire body went rigid, and the mare he'd been brushing whinnied nervously. Picking up on his sudden tension, "That'll be the Hendersons," he said quietly, setting down the brush. "Right on schedule." "What do you mean, on schedule?" Rebecca asked, but Garrett was already moving toward the front of the property, his limp more pronounced now after hours of walking the ranch. Two pickup trucks, both brand new, both sporting the same logo on their doors, Henderson and Sons Cattle Company, pulled to a stop near Rebecca's sedan. 4 men climbed out, all wearing expensive Stetsons and boots that had never seen real work. The oldest, a man in his 60s with a silver beard and cold blue eyes, surveyed the property with the air of someone evaluating a purchase. "Cole," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Saw an unfamiliar car. Thought we'd check if you were finally ready to be reasonable." "Mr. Henderson," Garrett replied, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't aware we had an appointment." "Don't need an appointment between neighbors." Thomas Henderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. His gaze slid to Rebecca, assessing. "And who might you be?" Rebecca stepped forward, her professional mask firmly in place. "Rebecca Morrison, Montana Department of Family Services. I'm conducting an official welfare visit." The effect was immediate. Thomas Henderson's expression shifted from casual superiority to something sharper, more calculating. The 3 younger men, his sons, Rebecca assumed, exchanged glances that she couldn't quite read. "Family Services?" Thomas said slowly. Well, finally someone's looking into what goes on out here." He turned to Garrett with mock concern. "Must be serious if the state's getting involved." "Everything all right, Cole?" "Everything's fine," Garrett said flatly. "Ms. Morrison was just leaving." But Thomas wasn't finished. He walked closer to the nearest pen, where several goats had gathered at the fence. "That's a lot of animals for one man to handle. Especially a man with—" He paused meaningfully, his eyes traveling over Garrett's scars and limitations. "I managed just fine," Garrett said, his scarred hand clenching into a fist at his side. "Do you, though?" Thomas pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Because I've been hearing things. Stories about strange noises at all hours. Animals in distress. Folks in town are worried, Cole. Worried about what's really happening out here." Rebecca's mind raced. The complaints. The anonymous tips. Suddenly the picture was becoming clearer. "Mr. Henderson," she said coolly, "are you saying you're one of the concerned citizens who's been contacting the authorities about this property?" Thomas's smile widened. "I'm saying I'm a responsible member of this community who takes his civic duties seriously. When I see something that concerns me, I speak up." He unfolded the paper, a legal document of some kind. "Which is why I've filed a formal complaint with the county about the conditions here. Health hazards, potential groundwater contamination from improper waste management, violation of livestock density regulations." He rattled off a list that sounded rehearsed. "Those are lies," Garrett said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Every inch of this property meets or exceeds county standards. I've had it inspected." "By who?" "Your girlfriend, the vet." One of Thomas's sons, a man in his 30s with a cruel mouth, laughed. "Everyone knows Sarah Blackwood's got a soft spot for lost causes. Her word doesn't count for much." "Watch your mouth, Derek," Garrett warned, taking a step forward. Thomas held up a hand, playing the peacemaker. Now, no need for hostility. I'm just saying, Cole, that you're clearly overwhelmed here. Too much land, too many animals, not enough resources. He pulled out another paper. Rebecca caught a glimpse of a letterhead. I've got a buyer ready to take this property off your hands. Fair price, quick close. You could take that money, find yourself a nice small place somewhere, maybe keep a few of your favorites. This land isn't for sale, Garrett said through gritted teeth. Everything's for sale at the right price. Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a tone that might have sounded friendly to someone who wasn't paying attention. But Rebecca heard the edge beneath it, sharp as a knife. Thing is, Cole, whether you sell to me willingly or not, you're not going to be here much longer. These complaints are just the beginning. The county's going to inspect. They're going to find violations. Trust me, they always do when they look hard enough. And then what? You lose the animals anyway. Probably get hit with fines you can't pay. Maybe even criminal charges if they decide you've been negligent. Are you threatening him? Rebecca asked sharply. Thomas turned to her with exaggerated innocence. Threatening? Miss Morrison, I'm trying to help. I'm offering Mr. Cole a way out of an impossible situation before it gets worse. He gestured at the property. Look at this place. The house is falling apart. He's clearly struggling. The humane thing would be to let someone with actual resources take over, give these animals proper care. The animals are receiving proper care, Rebecca said firmly. I've conducted a thorough inspection, and I've found no evidence of neglect or abuse. Well, that's good to hear. Thomas's tone suggested he didn't believe her. But you're child services, aren't you? Not animal control, not the health department, not the county zoning board. Those inspections are coming. Cole, and when they do, he let the sentence hang. The threat clear. Get off my property, Garrett said quietly. Too quietly. Rebecca recognized that tone. It was the sound of a man pushed to his absolute limit, holding on to control by the thinnest thread. Thomas shrugged, unbothered. We're going, but think about my offer. It's generous now, but it won't stay that way forever. He climbed back into his truck, his sons following. Before pulling away, he leaned out the window one last time. Oh, and Cole? That mare you've got, the pregnant one. She looks like she's having some trouble. Be a shame if something happened to her before you could get proper veterinary care. 'Cause a real rancher would know how to handle a difficult birth. But you... He trailed off with a shrug that said everything. The trucks kicked up dust as they drove away, and Rebecca watched them go with growing fury. She'd dealt with bullies before. Powerful people who used the system as a weapon against those who couldn't fight back. But this was blatant, almost cartoonish in its cruelty. How long has this been going on? She asked. Garrett stood motionless, staring after the trucks. About a year. Started with friendly offers to buy. Got less friendly over time. Last few months, they've escalated. He turned and began walking quickly toward the far pasture. I need to check on Daisy. Daisy? Rebecca hurried to keep up. The mare. She's due in about 3 weeks, but Henderson's right. She's been having problems. I've been monitoring her constantly, but if she goes into labor early... He didn't finish the sentence, but Rebecca could hear the fear in his voice. They found Daisy in a large paddock near the tree line. The mare was lying down, her sides heaving, her eyes rolling with distress. Garrett dropped to his knees beside her, his hands moving over her swollen belly with practiced care. Easy, girl, easy, he murmured. What's wrong? Talk to me. Rebecca felt utterly useless, standing there while Garrett examined the horse with increasing urgency. After a few minutes, he pulled out his phone. Rebecca was surprised to see it was a satellite model, expensive and clearly necessary given the lack of cell service. I'm calling Sarah, he said, already dialing. The call connected, and he launched into what sounded like veterinary jargon, terms Rebecca didn't understand, but that clearly painted a concerning picture. After a few minutes, he hung up. She's coming. Says it sounds like early labor, which shouldn't be fatal but needs monitoring. She'll be here in 45 minutes. What can I do? Rebecca asked. Stay with me. Keep talking. Daisy responds to voices, helps keep her calm. He positioned himself near the mare's head, stroking her neck. Tell me about yourself. Where you're from, anything. It was such an unexpected request that Rebecca almost laughed. But she sat down in the dirt beside him, her professional clothes be damned, and started talking. She told him about growing up in Billings, about her mother who'd been a nurse and her father who'd left when she was 8, about going to college on scholarships and choosing social work because she'd wanted to help people, though lately she wasn't sure she was helping anyone at all. "Why not?" Garrett asked, his attention still on Daisy, but clearly listening. "Because most days I feel like I'm just shuffling papers and checking boxes, going through the motions." Rebecca surprised herself with her honesty. "I became a social worker because I wanted to make a difference. But the system, it's broken in ways I don't know how to fix. And cases like yours, where someone's clearly being targeted, where the complaints are malicious rather than genuine, they just expose how easily that broken system can be weaponized." "So why help me?" Garrett's grey eyes met hers across Daisy's prone form. "Why not just file your report and let the system work itself out?" Rebecca thought about that, about the easy answer, that it was her job, her duty. But that wasn't the whole truth. "Because I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by bad ones. And because—" she paused, surprised by what she was about to say. "Because what you're doing here matters. These animals, they'd be dead without you. And you're not doing this for recognition or profit or any of the reasons people usually do things. You're doing it because they need you and you need them, and that's rare. That's worth protecting." Before Garrett could respond, headlights appeared through the trees, a beat-up jeep bumping over the rough terrain. A woman in her late 40s jumped out, a veterinary kit already in hand. She had grey-streaked brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the kind of face that suggested she smiled often, though she wasn't smiling now. "Sarah," Garrett said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God." Dr. Sarah Blackwood barely acknowledged Rebecca as she knelt beside the mare, her hands immediately beginning an examination. "Okay, Daisy girl, let's see what you're trying to tell us." After a few minutes of careful palpation and observation, she sat back on her heels. "She's in early labor, but the foal's positioned wrong. Breech. Can you turn it?" Garrett asked. "Maybe, but not out here. We need to get her into the barn, get her stabilized, and I need better equipment." Sarah looked at Garrett with concern. "This is going to be expensive, Garrett." "The medication alone. I don't care about the cost. Just save them. Both of them." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her phone to make calls. Within minutes, she'd arranged for a trailer to transport Daisy. While they waited, she finally acknowledged Rebecca. "You're the social worker." "The one asking questions about Garrett. I'm the one who got dragged into false complaints about non-existent children," Rebecca corrected. "And now I'm trying to figure out who's trying to destroy what Mr. Cole has built here." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Well, at least someone's finally paying attention. I've been telling the sheriff for months that the Hendersons are harassing Garrett. But Wade says his hands are tied unless there's proof of actual threats." "What about the complaints they're filing with the county?" Rebecca asked. "The health violations, the zoning issues?" "All garbage. I've inspected this property myself. It's cleaner and better managed than half the commercial operations in the state." Sarah's jaw tightened. "But Thomas Henderson sits on the county commission. He's got friends in every department. When he wants something investigated, it gets investigated. When he wants something overlooked, it gets overlooked." The trailer arrived, driven by a teenage boy who Sarah introduced as her nephew, Kyle. Together, the four of them managed to get Daisy into the trailer with surprisingly little difficulty. The mare seemed to sense they were trying to help, her trust in Garrett evident in the way she followed his voice. "I'm going with her," Garrett said. And climbing into the trailer. "I'm coming too," Rebecca heard herself say. Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't object. Kyle will drive. I'll ride in the trailer to monitor her. Rebecca, you can follow in your car." The convoy made its way slowly back to the barn, and for the next 3 hours, Rebecca watched as Garrett and Sarah worked to save the mare and her unborn foal. She'd never witnessed veterinary care up close before. The combination of medical knowledge, physical strength, and sheer determination required. Garrett's scarred hands proved surprisingly dexterous, following Sarah's instructions without hesitation. His focus absolute. "You're good at this," Sarah said at one point. catching a brief break while they waited for medication to take effect. You should consider going to vet school properly. You've got the instincts. Garrett shook his head. Nobody's going to accept someone who looks like me into their program. And even if they did, I can't afford it. There are scholarships, loans. Sarah. Garrett's tone was gentle but firm. I appreciate the thought, but we both know it's not realistic. He gestured around the barn. This is enough. This is all I need. But Rebecca, watching the skilled way he worked, thought it was a waste. Garrett Cole had found his calling, but the same scars that drove him to save broken animals kept him from reaching his full potential. It was deeply, profoundly unfair. At 2 a.m., after a delivery that had Rebecca holding her breath more times than she could count, a small, wet foal slid into the world. Garrett caught it, clearing its airways with practiced efficiency. And after a terrifying moment of silence, the foal drew its first shuddering breath. It's a colt, Sarah announced, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and relief. And Daisy's going to be fine. They both are. Garrett didn't say anything. He just knelt there in the hay, holding the newborn colt, and Rebecca saw tears cutting tracks down his scarred face. In that moment, she understood something fundamental about Garrett Cole. Every life he saved was a small redemption, a tiny proof that he was still capable of creating good in the world, despite everything that had tried to destroy him. As dawn began to break outside the barn, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Rebecca made a decision. She pulled out her phone, still no regular signal, but she had Sarah's Wi-Fi password now, and began typing an email to Margaret Chen. She was going to fight for Garrett Cole, for his animals, for this place, and if Thomas Henderson thought he could use the system to crush someone under Rebecca's watch, he was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a social worker who'd finally found something worth fighting for. Rebecca didn't go home that night. She couldn't, not with the newborn colt needing monitoring every 2 hours, not with Garrett running on fumes and refusing to rest, and certainly not with the email she'd sent to Margaret Chen, likely to explode into a full departmental crisis by Monday morning. Instead, she found herself in Garrett's kitchen at 6 a.m., making coffee in a pot that had probably been manufactured in the 1980s, while 3 cats, the ones he'd mentioned, wove between her legs, demanding breakfast. The house's interior matched the exterior, worn, outdated but meticulously clean. No dirty dishes in the sink, no clutter on the counters. Just the bare minimum of furniture and a distinct lack of anything personal. No photographs, no decorations. Nothing that spoke of a life before this place. You're still here, Garrett said from the doorway, startling her. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, his scarred face drawn with fatigue. Thought you could use the coffee, Rebecca said, pouring 2 cups. And someone needs to feed the cats. They've made their opinions about my tardiness very clear. The ghost of a smile crossed Garrett's face. That's Mr. Whiskers, Detective Paws, and Judge Fluffy. Sarah named them. I told her those were ridiculous names. And yet you use them, Rebecca observed, handing him a mug. Yeah, well. He took a sip, closing his eyes briefly. They suit them somehow. They drank in comfortable silence for a moment before Rebecca pulled out her laptop. I need to show you what I sent to my supervisor last night. She's going to call this morning, and you should know what you're getting into. Garrett set down his mug and read over her shoulder as she pulled up the sent email. Rebecca had spent 2 hours crafting it, documenting everything she'd observed. The condition of the animals, the quality of care, Garrett's makeshift veterinary training, the meticulous record-keeping. But she'd also included her suspicions about the Henderson family, their harassment, and her professional opinion that the complaints were part of a coordinated effort to force Garrett off his land. You didn't have to do this, Garrett said quietly when he finished reading. Yes, I did. It's the truth. Rebecca closed the laptop. But I need you to understand, this is going to get messy. Margaret's going to push back. She'll say I've overstepped, that I've gotten personally involved when I should have stayed objective. And she won't be entirely wrong, so why risk it? Rebecca thought about that question. She'd asked herself the same thing a dozen times while writing the email. Because sometimes The right thing and the easy thing aren't the same. And I'm tired of choosing easy. Her phone buzzed. Margaret Chen, right on schedule. Rebecca stepped outside to take the call, bracing herself for the lecture she knew was coming. Rebecca, what the hell am I reading? Margaret's voice was sharp with displeasure. You were supposed to do a simple welfare check, not launch an investigation into local land disputes. The welfare check is complete. There are no children on the property. The case should be closed, and yet you've written a 3-page email about harassment, coercion, and conspiracy. That's not your job. Isn't it? Rebecca kept her voice calm. Someone weaponized our department to harass an innocent person. They filed false reports, wasted state resources, and tried to use us as a tool to destroy someone's life. If we don't push back on that, we're complicit. Margaret was silent for a long moment. The Hendersons are a prominent family in that county. Thomas Henderson has been on the commission for 15 years. If you're accusing them of filing false reports, you'd better have ironclad proof. I'm working on it. Rebecca, Margaret, I'm asking for 1 week. Let me document everything properly. Get statements from witnesses. Build an actual case. If I'm wrong, I'll close the file and apologize to everyone involved. But if I'm right... Rebecca paused, choosing her words carefully. If I'm right, we're looking at systemic abuse of the reporting system, and we have a responsibility to address it. Another long silence. Then 1 week. But Rebecca, if this blows up in your face, I can't protect you. The department can't afford the political fallout of going after a county commissioner without overwhelming evidence. Understood. The call ended, and Rebecca stood there for a moment watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. She'd bought herself 7 days. Now she had to make them count. Inside, she found Garrett at the kitchen table, his laptop open, spreadsheets visible on the screen. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Budget projections?" "Trying to figure out how much Sarah's emergency visit is going to set me back." He rubbed his scarred face tiredly. "I've got about 3,000 in savings. Last night probably cost half of that." Rebecca looked over his shoulder at the meticulous financial records. Every expense tracked, every dollar accounted for. Feed costs, medical supplies, property maintenance, it was all there, documented with the same care he gave everything else. And it painted a stark picture. Garrett was barely keeping his head above water financially. "What about income?" she asked. "You mentioned doing work online?" "Freelance graphic design mostly. I was pretty good at it before." He gestured vaguely at his scarred hands. "Some data entry, transcription work, whatever I can do remotely. But it's not consistent, and I can't take on big projects because I need to be available for the animals." "Have you considered fundraising? A lot of animal sanctuaries use social media, crowdfunding." "No." The word was flat, absolute. "I'm not putting myself out there like that. I don't want people's pity donations because they feel sorry for the burned freak trying to save some goats. That's not what I know what it would be, Rebecca. I've seen how people look at me. The last thing I want is to become some viral sob story." He closed the laptop with more force than necessary. "I'll figure it out." "I always do." Rebecca recognized the pride in his voice, the same stubborn independence that probably kept him isolated out here in the first place. But pride wouldn't pay Sarah's bills or keep the feed bins full. "Okay," she said, shifting topics. "Then let's focus on what we can control. I need to interview people in town, get a sense of the Hendersons' influence, and whether anyone else has had problems with them. Can you give me names?" Over the next hour, Garrett provided a list. Sarah Blackwood, obviously. Sheriff Wade Brennan, though Garrett seemed uncertain about whose side Wade was really on. The owner of the feed store, Jim Patterson, who'd always been decent to Garrett despite the stares. And a few others who might be willing to talk. "What about enemies?" Rebecca asked. "Besides the Hendersons, is there anyone else who might want you gone?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "There's Carol Pratt. She and her husband run cattle on leased land south of here. They're not as aggressive as the Hendersons, but they've made offers too. And then there's..." He hesitated. "Who?" "My ex-wife, Linda." The name seemed to pain him. "She lives in Billings now, remarried. We don't talk, but she wasn't happy when I bought this place. Thought I was wasting the settlement money, throwing my life away. Would she file complaints against you? I don't know, maybe. Not out of malice, but he struggled to find the words. Linda's a good person, but she never understood why I needed this. To her, I was just hiding from the world. She might think she's helping, trying to force me back into society. Rebecca made a note to look into Linda Cole, though given the distance and the lack of connection to Crossfield, she seemed like a long shot. The Hendersons remained the most obvious suspects. By mid-morning, Rebecca was in her car, heading into Crossfield proper. The town was exactly as she'd imagined. One main street with a handful of businesses, a gas station, a diner, and enough empty storefronts to suggest the local economy wasn't thriving. The feed store sat at the far end, a weathered building with a faded sign, Patterson's Feed and Supply. Jim Patterson was a man in his 60s, lean and weathered like the building he owned. When Rebecca introduced herself and explained why she was there, his expression turned wary. "You're here about Garrett Cole," he said. "It wasn't a question, I am. I understand you sell him supplies. Have for about 5 years now. He's a good customer. Pays on time, doesn't cause trouble." Jim crossed his arms. "What's this about?" Rebecca chose her words carefully. "There have been complaints filed about his property. I'm trying to determine if they're legitimate or if someone might have other motives for targeting him." Jim's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Thomas Henderson's behind this?" "Why would you say that?" "Because Thomas has been trying to buy up every piece of land in this valley for the last decade. The Cole property is prime grazing land, plenty of water, borders his ranch on 2 sides. Garrett's refusal to sell has been a thorn in Thomas's side since day one." Jim moved to the counter, pulling out a ledger. "You want to know about Garrett? I'll tell you. He comes in here once a month, buys exactly what he needs, never wastes a dollar. He knows more about animal nutrition than most ranchers I've dealt with. And yeah, people stare at him, make comments after he leaves. But he's never been anything but polite and respectful. Has Thomas Henderson ever said anything to you about wanting Garrett's land?" Jim hesitated, and Rebecca could see the internal debate playing out. In a town this small, speaking against someone like Thomas Henderson could have consequences. But finally he nodded. "About 3 months ago, Thomas came in here asking questions. Wanted to know if Garrett was behind on his feed bills, if I'd heard anything about him struggling. I told him Garrett's accounts were current, and that's all I was going to say." Thomas didn't like that answer. He met Rebecca's eyes. 2 weeks later, someone filed a complaint with the county about my septic system. Cost me $5,000 to get it up to code, even though it had passed inspection 6 months earlier. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. "You think Henderson was behind that?" "I think Thomas Henderson doesn't like being told no. And I think people in this town have learned not to cross him if they want to stay in business." After leaving the feed store, Rebecca visited the diner, Martha's Kitchen, according to the hand-painted sign. The lunch rush hadn't started yet, and she found the owner, Martha Yates, refilling salt shakers at the counter. Martha was more circumspect than Jim, but she confirmed the basic pattern. Thomas Henderson was the most powerful man in Crossfield. His family had been there for 3 generations, and people who opposed him tended to face mysterious problems with permits, inspections, and regulations. "But I'll tell you something else," Martha said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Garrett Cole is one of the good ones. He came in here once, about 2 years ago. First time I'd seen him in town. My grandson was here. Tyler, he's 6, and Tyler stared at Garrett's face, said something kids say without thinking. Asked if Garrett was a monster. Rebecca winced. "But you know what Garrett did?" He knelt down to Tyler's level and said, "No, buddy. I'm just someone who got hurt trying to help people. Sometimes heroes get scars." And then he showed Tyler his hands, explained about the fire, made it into this gentle teaching moment. Martha's eyes were moist. Tyler went home and told his mama he wanted to be a firefighter when he grew up, someone brave enough to get scars. That's the kind of man Garrett Cole is. By the time Rebecca made it to the sheriff's office, she had a clearer picture of the situation. Thomas Henderson wielded his power like a weapon, and Garrett was just his latest target. But proving it would be another matter entirely. Sheriff Wade Brennan was younger than she expected, mid-40s, with the kind of lived-in face that suggested he took his job seriously. When Rebecca explained her presence, he listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. "So you're asking if I think Thomas Henderson is behind these complaints?" Wade said when she finished. "I'm asking what you know about the situation." Wade leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Off the record, I think Garrett's being squeezed out and Thomas is doing the squeezing." "On the record?" "I've got no proof. Thomas is too smart to make direct threats or put anything in writing. It's all suggestions, implications, coincidences." He pulled out a file from his desk drawer. "But I've been keeping track. Every time someone in this county refuses to sell to the Hendersons, they suddenly start having problems. Building permits denied, health inspections failed, mysterious livestock deaths. You're saying Henderson kills animals? I'm saying animals die. Could be natural causes. Could be something else. But it's enough to make people nervous, enough to make them take the offer before things get worse." Wade's expression hardened. "I've been trying to build a case for 2 years, but without witnesses willing to go on record, without hard evidence, my hands are tied." "What if we could get that evidence?" Rebecca asked. "What if we could prove Henderson was behind the false complaints about Garrett?" "Then I'd arrest him myself." Wade leaned forward. "But you need to understand what you're up against. Thomas Henderson doesn't just have money and influence. He's got friends in the state legislature, connections with the governor's office. If you come at him and miss, he'll bury you. And Garrett along with you." Rebecca left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers. She had a pattern of behavior, multiple witnesses who suspected Henderson's involvement, but nothing concrete, nothing that would hold up in court or force the county to act. As she drove back to Garrett's property, watching the sun begin its afternoon descent, Rebecca realized the truth. They weren't just fighting Thomas Henderson. They were fighting an entire system that protected men like him while grinding down people like Garrett. But Rebecca had spent 11 years as a social worker. She'd learned how to navigate broken systems, how to find leverage where none seemed to exist, how to turn paperwork into a weapon. Thomas Henderson had made one critical mistake. He'd brought child services into his scheme. And now Rebecca Morrison was going to make him regret it. When she pulled up to the ranch, she found Garrett in the barn with the new colt, who was already standing on shaky legs, nuzzling his mother. The sight of them, the scarred man and the newborn horse, both survivors in their own way, strengthened her resolve. "We're going to win this," Rebecca said without preamble. Garrett looked up, surprise crossing his face. "What did you find out?" "Everything I need to know about how Thomas Henderson operates. And more importantly," she pulled out her phone, already composing a new email, "I know exactly how to stop him." For the first time since they'd met, Garrett Cole smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes despite the scars. "Then let's get to work." The county inspector arrived 3 days later, exactly as Thomas Henderson had promised. Rebecca watched from the barn as a white truck with official markings pulled up the drive, and followed closely by a second vehicle, a news van from the regional station in Great Falls. "They brought media," Garrett said flatly, standing beside her. His entire body had gone rigid. "Thomas wants to make sure everyone sees this." Rebecca's mind raced. Henderson was playing this perfectly, positioned the inspection as a righteous investigation into animal welfare concerns. Get it on the evening news, and regardless of what the inspector actually found, the damage to Garrett's reputation would be irreversible. In a small town like Crossfield, perception mattered more than truth. "Stay calm," Rebecca said quietly. "I called in some backup of my own." A third vehicle crested the hill, Sarah Blackwood's Jeep, followed by another truck Rebecca didn't recognize. When it parked, a woman in her 50s climbed out, carrying a professional camera and a no-nonsense expression. "Who's that?" Garrett asked. "Diane Foster, investigative reporter from Billings. She owes me a favor from a case 3 years ago." Rebecca had spent most of the previous night on the phone, calling in every marker she had. If Henderson wants media coverage, we'll give him media coverage. Just not the kind he's expecting. The county inspector was a thin man in his 40s, named Robert Chen, no relation to Margaret, Rebecca had verified. He approached with his clipboard, his expression professionally neutral, though his eyes kept darting to the news camera already being set up. "Mr. Cole? I'm Inspector Chen from the County Health and Environmental Services. I'm here to conduct a routine inspection of your property, following complaints about livestock density, waste management, and animal welfare concerns." He pulled out a document. "I have a warrant granting me access to all structures and land on this property." "I understand," Garrett said, his voice carefully controlled. "Where would you like to start?" Before Chen could answer, Sarah stepped forward. "Inspector Chen, I'm Dr. Sarah Blackwood, the licensed veterinarian who provides care for the animals on this property. I'd like to be present during your inspection to answer any medical questions that might arise." Chen hesitated, clearly not expecting professional representation. "That's unusual, but acceptable." Diane Foster moved in next, her camera rolling. "Inspector Chen, Diane Foster, Montana Public Radio. Can you tell our listeners what prompted this inspection?" Chen looked uncomfortable. "We received multiple complaints regarding multiple anonymous complaints," Rebecca interjected, stepping forward with her own documentation. "Rebecca Morrison, Montana Department of Family Services. I conducted my own investigation of this property last week and found all complaints to be without merit. I've documented everything in my official report, which I'd be happy to share with you. Inspector, the reporter from the Great Falls station, a young woman who'd been setting up for what she clearly expected to be a simple story about animal hoarding, suddenly looked uncertain, her camera operator swinging to capture this new development. Chen's professional neutrality cracked slightly. "Ms. Morrison, this is a county health inspection, not a family services matter." "True, but the complaints that triggered your inspection were filed with multiple agencies, including mine. And I've found evidence suggesting those complaints may have been filed maliciously as part of a coordinated harassment campaign." Rebecca pulled out her tablet, loaded with the documentation she'd spent 3 days compiling. "I have statements from local business owners detailing a pattern of retaliation against anyone who refuses to sell property to the Henderson family. I have financial records showing Mr. Cole's meticulous care and appropriate spending on animal welfare. And I have veterinary records from Dr. Blackwood confirming that every animal on this property receives professional medical care, exceeding industry standards." Diane Foster's camera was now pointed directly at Rebecca. "You're alleging that Thomas Henderson, the county commissioner, is behind false complaints against Mr. Cole?" "I'm saying that the evidence points to a pattern of harassment that should be investigated," Rebecca said carefully, "and that this inspection should be conducted with full awareness of that context." The Great Falls reporter was now filming everything, clearly realizing she'd stumbled into a much bigger story. Inspector Chen looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I still need to conduct the inspection," he said weakly. "That's my job." "Of course," Sarah said smoothly, "and we'll cooperate fully, because we have nothing to hide." What followed was the most thorough property inspection Rebecca had ever witnessed. Chen examined every pen, every water source, every feed storage area. He measured livestock density per acre. He inspected waste management systems. He reviewed medical records and feeding schedules. And through it all, Sarah was there, calmly explaining Garrett's systems, pointing out the sophistication of his care protocols, demonstrating the quality of the facilities. 2 hours in, Chen's professional neutrality had transformed into something resembling admiration. "Mr. Cole, can you explain how you built this filtration system for the water troughs?" Garrett, who'd been silent for most of the inspection, stepped forward. "I researched commercial systems, but they were too expensive. So I designed my own using aquarium filters and food-grade materials. It reduces bacterial growth by about 70% compared to standard troughs. And you built this yourself? Yes, sir. Garrett gestured with his scarred hands. Most of the infrastructure here, I built it. Had to learn as I went. But YouTube's a good teacher. Chen made notes, his expression thoughtful. He moved to the medical supply cabinet in the barn, conducting an inventory that matched perfectly with Garrett's records. He inspected the new colt and his mother, both thriving. He even counted animals, verifying that the density was well within legal limits. Finally, after 3 hours, Chen lowered his clipboard and addressed both cameras directly. Based on my inspection, I find no violations of county health codes, environmental regulations, or animal welfare standards. In fact, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. This property demonstrates a level of care and management that exceeds what I typically see in commercial operations, twice this size. The Great Falls reporter pressed forward. So the complaints were false? I can only speak to what I observed today. But yes, the concerns cited in the complaints do not reflect the reality of this property's conditions. Diane Foster turned to Garrett, her camera capturing his scarred face in the afternoon light. Mr. Cole, how do you respond to what appears to be a campaign of false accusations against you? Garrett was quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca could see him struggling with whether to speak. Finally he said, I just want to be left alone to take care of my animals. These creatures, they've been abandoned, abused, neglected. They deserve a safe place to live out their lives. That's all I'm trying to provide. If someone has a problem with that, I don't understand why. The vulnerability in his voice, the genuine confusion about why anyone would try to take this away from him. It was compelling television, and Rebecca could see both reporters recognizing it. After the inspection team left, Chen promising a written report within 48 hours, Rebecca, Sarah, and Diane remained behind. The Great Falls reporter had left quickly, probably rushing to get her story on the evening news. That went better than I expected, Sarah said, watching the vehicles disappear down the road. Chen seemed genuinely impressed. He should be, Diane said, reviewing her footage. This is an incredible operation for one person. Garrett, would you be willing to do a longer interview? I think there's a larger story here about rural animal rescue, the challenges of— No, Garrett's voice was firm. I appreciate your help today, but I'm not looking to become some kind of news story. Diane studied him for a moment, then nodded. I understand. But I am going to run what we filmed today, and I'm going to dig into Thomas Henderson's pattern of property acquisition. If he's been using false complaints and regulatory harassment to force people off their land, that's a story the public needs to know about. After Diane left, Garrett disappeared into the barn without a word. Sarah watched him go, her expression concerned. He's not good with attention, she said quietly to Rebecca. Even positive attention. The idea of people watching him, talking about him, it's his worst nightmare. I know. But we needed the media coverage to counter Henderson's narrative. Rebecca felt a pang of guilt. She'd made tactical decisions without fully considering how they'd affect Garrett emotionally. Will he be okay? Eventually. He just needs time to process. Sarah pulled out her phone. I should go. I've got evening appointments. But Rebecca, thank you for fighting for him. Most people wouldn't bother. After Sarah drove away, Rebecca found Garrett in the barn, sitting on a hay bale next to Daisy's stall. The mare and her colt were both resting, the picture of contentment. Garrett wasn't looking at them, though. He was staring at his scarred hands, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Rebecca said, sitting down beside him. I should have warned you about Diane, prepared you better for the cameras. It's fine. It's not fine. I made decisions that affected you without asking how you felt about them. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then, when I first got burned, they tried to prepare me for what it would be like. The stares, the reactions, the way children would cry and adults would look away. The therapist said I'd adjust, that I'd develop coping mechanisms, that eventually it wouldn't hurt as much. He flexed his damaged left hand. They were wrong. It still hurts. Every time. Every single person who sees me and can't hide their shock or disgust or pity, it's like being burned all over again. Rebecca's chest ached. Garrett, but today when that inspector looked at me and didn't see a monster, when he saw someone who'd built something worth respecting. Garrett's voice cracked. That almost hurt worse, because it reminded me of who I used to be before. You're still that person, Rebecca said firmly. The fire didn't change who you are. It just changed what you look like. Doesn't it amount to the same thing? In the world where people judge you in the first 3 seconds they see you. Rebecca thought about that. Maybe, but that says more about the world than it does about you. They sat in silence as the sun began to set, painting the barn in warm golden light. The animals were settling for the evening, their sounds creating a peaceful backdrop. It should have felt like a victory. The inspection passed, the media coverage shifting in their favor. But Rebecca could sense that the battle was far from over. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane Foster. "You need to see this." A link followed. Rebecca opened it and felt her blood run cold. It was a statement from Thomas Henderson, already posted on the county website and the local news sites. While I'm relieved that today's inspection found no immediate health violations at the Cole property, I remain concerned about the long-term sustainability of this operation. Mr. Cole is clearly overwhelmed and under-resourced. As County Commissioner, I'm calling for ongoing monitoring of the property and offering county assistance to help relocate these animals to properly funded sanctuaries where they can receive professional care. Sometimes compassion means recognizing when someone needs help, even if they're too proud to ask for it. Son of a... Rebecca stopped herself, but Garrett had already seen her expression. "What is it?" She showed him the statement. Garrett read it, his face going pale beneath the scars. "He's spinning it," Garrett said quietly, making himself look like the concerned citizen while painting me as the struggling victim who needs to be saved from himself. "It's manipulation," Rebecca agreed. "He's setting up the narrative that even though you passed inspection, you're still not capable of maintaining this place long-term. He's planting seeds of doubt, and it'll work," Garrett said bitterly, "because people want to believe it. It's easier to see me as a tragic figure who needs rescuing than as someone who's actually competent and succeeding." Rebecca's mind was already racing through the implications. Henderson wasn't backing down. He was adapting his strategy. If he couldn't shut Garrett down through health violations, he'd undermine him through public opinion and the suggestion of instability. "We need to show financial sustainability," Rebecca said, thinking out loud. "Prove that you can maintain this operation long-term without county intervention. With what money?" Garrett laughed harshly. "I'm already operating on a shoestring. Sarah's emergency visit last week wiped out my savings. I've got maybe 6 months of feed costs covered, and that's assuming nothing else goes wrong. Then we need to find funding. Grants, donations. I told you I'm not going to beg for money. It's not begging. It's accepting support for important work." Rebecca turned to face him fully. "Garrett, you can't do this alone anymore. Henderson has resources, influence, power. The only way to fight that is to build your own base of support. People who believe in what you're doing and are willing to back it up with action." Garrett stood up abruptly, pacing the barn. "You don't understand. The moment I start accepting donations, start building a public profile, I become a spectacle. The scarred man and his rescue animals, please send money. That's not what this is supposed to be." "Then what is it supposed to be?" "Private." The word echoed in the barn, startling the animals. Garrett took a breath, visibly trying to calm himself. "This is supposed to be private. A place where I don't have to perform, or explain, or justify my existence to anyone. Where I can just be." Rebecca stood up too, moving closer. "I know, and I'm sorry that Henderson's taken that privacy away from you. But he has, and now you have a choice. Retreat and let him win, or fight back even though it means exposure." "Those aren't choices," Garrett said. "They're both losses." "Maybe," Rebecca conceded, "but one of them lets you keep your animals. Keep this place. Keep doing the work that clearly gives your life meaning." Garrett leaned against Daisy's stall, the mare lifting her head to nuzzle his shoulder. He stroked her neck absently, his eyes distant. "When I was in the hospital after the fire," he said quietly, "I had this therapist who kept asking me what I was living for, what my reason was for pushing through the pain, the surgeries, the rehabilitation, and I couldn't answer her. Because the truth was I wasn't sure I had a reason." He looked at Rebecca. "This place, these animals, they gave me an answer. But if doing this means becoming a public figure, letting people examine and judge and pity me all over again, then we'll do it on your terms," Rebecca said firmly. "We'll control the narrative. Tell your story the way you want it told. Show people the work, not just the man. And if they still see me as a freak show, then they're not the people we need." Rebecca pulled out her phone. "But I think you'll be surprised. The world's changed a lot since you isolated yourself out here. People understand trauma better. They respect survival. And they love animals. If we do this right, you won't be a spectacle. You'll be a hero." Garrett looked at her skeptically, but Rebecca could see the tiny flicker of hope in his eyes. The same hope she'd seen when she'd promised to help him fight. "Okay," he said finally. "But we do it my way. No sob stories, no pity party. Just the facts about what this place does and why it matters. Deal." As they shook hands, Rebecca felt the weight of what they were about to do. They were going to war with Thomas Henderson, and the battlefield would be public opinion. It was risky, potentially humiliating for Garrett, and could easily backfire. But as she looked around at the barn full of rescued animals, at the careful systems Garrett had built, at the life he'd created from the ashes of his old one, Rebecca knew it was worth fighting for. They just had to hope it would be enough. Rebecca spent the next 48 hours turning Garrett's ranch into a case study in transparency. She documented everything: feeding schedules, medical protocols, financial records, animal histories. With Garrett's reluctant permission, she created a simple website, not asking for donations, just presenting facts. Before and after photos of rescued animals. Testimonials from Sarah Blackwood. The inspector's report, once it came through, posted in its entirety. "This feels wrong," Garrett said, watching over her shoulder as she uploaded a photo of the Wilson goats. "Like I'm exploiting them." "You're advocating for them," Rebecca corrected. "There's a difference. These animals can't speak for themselves, but their transformations tell a story. And that story matters." Diane Foster's piece aired on Montana Public Radio 3 days after the inspection. It was nothing like the hit piece Henderson had clearly expected. Instead, Diane had crafted a nuanced investigation into rural property rights, examining the pattern of complaints and forced sales across 3 counties. She interviewed other landowners who'd faced similar pressure from the Henderson family, people Rebecca hadn't even known about. Mark Sullivan, a widower who'd owned a small horse rescue until he sold 2 years ago. "I couldn't prove anything," he told Diane on the recording. "But after I refused Thomas Henderson's first offer, suddenly my well water tested contaminated. Cost me $15,000 to drill a new well. Then my barn had a mysterious electrical fire. Insurance covered it, but I got the message. Told 6 months later, Jennifer Wu, who'd run an organic farm until last year, the county suddenly decided my irrigation system violated outdated regulations nobody had enforced in decades. The legal fees alone would have bankrupted me. The Hendersons bought my land at auction. 3 more stories, all following the same pattern. And while none of the victims could definitively prove Henderson's involvement, the circumstantial evidence was damning. By the end of the piece, Diane posed the question directly: how many more people will lose their property before someone investigates whether Thomas Henderson is abusing his position as county commissioner? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Rebecca's phone rang constantly, other reporters wanting interviews, attorneys offering pro bono services, animal welfare organizations asking how they could help. The website she'd created for Garrett received over 10,000 visits in the first 24 hours. And the emails, dozens of them, from people offering support, but it was the physical mail that really changed things. Letters started arriving at Garrett's property, forwarded from Rebecca's office, addressed to the scarred rancher and the man who saves animals. Some contained small checks. $20, $50. One woman sent $5 with a note. I'm on disability and don't have much, but what you're doing matters. Please keep fighting. Garrett held that letter for a long time, his scarred fingers trembling slightly. I don't know what to do with this, he said quietly. You accept it, Rebecca said gently. You let people help, but I don't know her. She doesn't know me. Why would she? Because people want to believe that good exists in the world, that kindness matters, that someone's out there fighting for the ones who can't fight for themselves. Rebecca gestured at the animals grazing in the fields. You've given them that. Let them give something back. Over the next week, the mail continued. $100 checks, money orders. One anonymous donation for $5,000 with only a note. My son was disfigured in an accident. Your story gave him hope. Thank you. Sarah set up a proper non-profit structure. Cole's Second Chances Animal Sanctuary, with Garrett as founder and director, Sarah as medical advisor, and Rebecca as board member. They opened a bank account, established transparent financial reporting, created an adoption policy for the animals that met strict criteria. Everything by the book, everything above reproach. You know what this means, Sarah said during one of their planning sessions in Garrett's kitchen. You're official now, a real sanctuary. That comes with obligations, public accountability. I know, Garrett said, though he looked like he was agreeing to a prison sentence rather than a triumph. But something unexpected happened as the sanctuary gained attention. People started showing up. First, it was a teenage boy named Marcus Wheeler, who appeared one Saturday morning with his father. I saw you on the news, Marcus said shyly, barely able to look at Garrett's face. I want to volunteer. I'm good with animals and I need community service hours for school. Garrett had looked at Rebecca helplessly, clearly out of his depth. But they'd agreed to let Marcus help with afternoon feeding, and the kid proved surprisingly capable. More importantly, by his third visit, Marcus was making eye contact with Garrett, asking questions about animal care, treating him like a teacher rather than a monster. Then came Lisa and Tom Cartwright, a retired couple from Great Falls who offered to help with weekend maintenance. We've been looking for something meaningful to do, Lisa explained. And this place, what you're doing here, it's important. Within 2 weeks, Garrett had 6 regular volunteers, people who showed up rain or shine, who learned the animals' names, who treated the sanctuary like it mattered because it did. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rebecca watched Garrett begin to relax around them. He still struggled with new faces, still tensed when people stared at his scars. But the volunteers, they saw past the damage. They saw the skill in his hands, the gentleness in his voice, the dedication in his work. And gradually, they taught Garrett something he'd forgotten, that he could be valued for what he did, not judged for how he looked. But Henderson wasn't finished. The attack came subtly at first. A letter to the editor in the Crossfield Weekly, signed by concerned citizens, questioning whether donated funds were being properly managed. An anonymous complaint to the IRS about potential tax violations. A rumor spread carefully through town that Garrett was mentally unstable and shouldn't be around vulnerable animals or volunteers. He's trying to poison the well, Sheriff Brennan said when Rebecca brought the evidence to him. They were sitting in his office, the door closed against potential eavesdroppers. Classic Henderson strategy: can't win directly, so undermine credibility until people start doubting everything. Can you do anything? Rebecca asked. Wade spread his hands helplessly. I've got no proof he's behind any of this. The letter to the editor is protected speech. The IRS complaint is anonymous. And the rumors, he shook his head. You can't arrest someone for gossip, so we just let him chip away at everything we've built. No, we document everything, build our own case, and wait for him to make a mistake. Wade leaned forward. Because he will. Men like Thomas Henderson, they get cocky. They overreach. And when he does, I'll be ready. Rebecca left the sheriff's office frustrated but determined. If Henderson wanted a war of attrition, fine. They'd play the long game. What she didn't expect was for the community to fight back on Garrett's behalf. Jim Patterson published an open letter in the Crossfield Weekly, directly refuting the concerned citizen's letter and detailing his own experiences with Henderson's retaliation. Martha from the diner organized a fundraiser dinner, with all proceeds going to the sanctuary. The volunteer coordinator at the local library, a woman named Alice Chen, who'd been quietly following the story, started a letter-writing campaign to the County Board of Supervisors, demanding an investigation into Henderson's business practices. Even more surprising was the support from outside Crossfield. Sarah's veterinary colleagues began referring rescue cases to Garrett. A horse rescue organization in Bozeman reached out about potential collaboration. The Montana chapter of the Humane Society sent an official letter of commendation, praising the sanctuary's standards and asking if Garrett would consider expanding to take more at-risk animals. "This is getting too big," Garrett said one evening, standing in the barn and looking at the plans Sarah had sketched out for a potential expansion. "This isn't what I wanted. What did you want?" Rebecca asked. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted to disappear. I wanted to be left alone. I wanted," he trailed off, struggling to find words. "I wanted to not matter anymore, because if I didn't matter, then losing everything wouldn't hurt as much." The raw honesty of that statement hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "Garrett, but now I matter again. People are counting on me. These volunteers show up every weekend. We've got animals being transported here from across the state. There's an IRS audit because Henderson filed a complaint. The county board is reviewing the sanctuary's licenses." His voice rose with each sentence. "What happens when I can't handle it? When the pressure gets too much and I fall apart? What happens to all of them then?" "You won't fall apart," Rebecca said firmly. "You don't know that. I do. Because you've already been through the worst thing that can happen to a person. You survived a fire that should have killed you. You lost your career, your marriage, your entire identity. And you're still here. Still fighting. Still saving lives?" Rebecca moved closer. "Henderson thinks pressure will break you. But pressure doesn't break people like you, Garrett. It just proves how strong you've always been." Garrett turned away, but not before Rebecca saw the moisture in his eyes. "I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of fighting, I know. But you're not fighting alone anymore. That's the difference." Before Garrett could respond, Marcus appeared in the barn doorway. The teenager had become a fixture at the sanctuary, showing up after school most days to help with feeding and grooming. "Garrett, there's someone here to see you," says she's your wife. The color drained from Garrett's face. "Ex-wife," he corrected automatically. "Then Linda's here?" Rebecca followed Garrett outside, where a sedan was parked near the house. A woman in her early 40s stood beside it, attractive, well-dressed, her expression a complicated mixture of emotions as she watched Garrett approach. "Hello, Garrett," Linda said softly. Her eyes traveled over his scars, and Rebecca saw her flinch slightly before controlling her expression. You look well. What are you doing here?" Garrett's voice was flat, carefully neutral. "I saw the news coverage. Read the articles." Linda glanced at Rebecca, clearly wondering who she was. "I wanted to see if it was true, if you'd really built all this." "It's true." Linda walked toward the nearest paddock, where several goats immediately came to investigate. She watched them with something like wonder. "When you told me you were buying this place, using all the settlement money to move to the middle of nowhere, I thought you were running away, giving up on life." "Maybe I was," Garrett said, "but this isn't giving up. This is—" Linda struggled for words. "This is beautiful, Garrett. What you've created here. These animals, they're thriving because of you. Did you file those complaints?" Garrett asked abruptly. "Tell the county I was unfit, that the animals were in danger?" Linda's head snapped around. "What? No!" "Garrett, I would never—" She stopped, hurt flashing across her face. "Is that what you think of me?" "I don't know what to think. We haven't spoken in 5 years." "Because you pushed me away," Linda said, her voice rising with old pain. "Because after the accident, you looked at me like I was a stranger. Like I couldn't possibly understand what you were going through. You couldn't. I was your wife. I wanted to help, to be there for you. but you shut me out completely. You stopped talking to me, stopped letting me touch you. You looked at yourself in the mirror like you were a monster, and eventually you started treating me like I thought you were one too. Didn't you?" Garrett's voice was harsh. "Didn't you look at me and see something broken and ruined?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I looked at you and saw the man I loved hurting in ways I couldn't fix. And yes, it was hard. Yes, your injuries were shocking and the surgeries were traumatic, and watching you suffer was the worst thing I've ever experienced." She took a shaky breath. "But I never stopped loving you, Garrett. You're the one who stopped letting me." The silence stretched between them, years of hurt and misunderstanding crystallizing in the autumn air. Rebecca felt like an intruder on this moment, but she couldn't leave. Not when Garrett might need support. "Why are you here, Linda?" Garrett asked finally, his voice tired. "After all this time?" "Because when I saw what you've built, I realized something." Linda wiped her eyes. "You didn't need me to save you. You needed to save yourself. And you did that through saving them." She gestured at the animals. "I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry that I wasn't strong enough to wait while you figured that out. I never asked you to wait. I know. But maybe you should have." Linda pulled an envelope from her purse. "Now I'm remarried now. Mike, my husband, he's a good man. We're happy. But I've been following your story and I wanted to help." She handed Garrett the envelope. "It's not much. $10,000. I know the sanctuary needs funding, and this seemed like a better use of the money than most things." Garrett stared at the envelope, like it might bite him. "Linda, I can't—" "Yes, you can. Consider it an apology for not understanding sooner. For not seeing that this—" She looked around the property. "This is who you were always meant to be. Not the firefighter who saved people from burning buildings. The man who saves the ones nobody else wants." She leaned forward and kissed his scarred cheek, a gesture so tender and unexpected that Garrett froze. "Goodbye, Garrett. I hope you find happiness here. You deserve it." Linda walked back to her car, and Rebecca watched her drive away, leaving Garrett standing in the dust with an envelope in his hands and an expression of complete bewilderment on his face. "Did that really just happen?" he asked. "I think it did," Rebecca said. Garrett opened the envelope, confirming the check inside. $10,000. Not enough to solve all their problems, but enough to buy breathing room. Enough to prove that even his ex-wife, someone who'd left him at his lowest point, believed in what he was doing now. "I don't understand people," Garrett said finally. 5 years ago, she couldn't get away from me fast enough. Now she's giving me money and kissing my face. She got perspective," Rebecca said. "And maybe she realized that leaving you wasn't about you being unlovable. It was about her not being able to handle watching you suffer. That doesn't make it better. No, but maybe it makes it more human. We're all just trying our best and failing in different ways." Rebecca touched his arm gently. "At least she tried to make it right. That's more than most people do." They stood there for a while, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. The animals were settling for the evening, their sounds creating a familiar symphony. Marcus was still in the barn, finishing the feeding routine. Somewhere in town, Jim Patterson and Martha and Alice Chen and others were fighting for this place. For Garrett, for the idea that second chances mattered. And in his office, Thomas Henderson was probably planning his next move, his next attack. His next attempt to destroy everything they'd built, but standing there in the fading light, surrounded by the evidence of survival and hope, Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in years, the certainty that they were on the right side, that the fight was worth it, that sometimes, when you stopped running and started standing your ground, the world surprised you by standing with you. "Come on," she said to Garrett. "Let's go make sure Marcus hasn't accidentally adopted another goat." "The kid's got a soft spot for the runts." Garrett smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "He reminds me of someone." "Who?" "Me, before I learned that the world could break you." "Then let's make sure he never has to learn that lesson," Rebecca said. "Let's show him that the world can heal you too." As they walked toward the barn together, Rebecca allowed herself a moment of hope. Henderson wasn't finished. She knew that. There would be more attacks, more obstacles, more battles to fight, But they had something Henderson didn't, a community that believed in them. And sometimes that made all the difference. The attack came on a Friday night, when the sanctuary was quiet and most of the volunteers had gone home. Rebecca had stayed late, helping Garrett review grant applications in his kitchen. When they heard the sound, a crash, followed by panicked animal cries from the far pasture, Garrett was on his feet instantly, grabbing a flashlight and running toward the sound with a speed Rebecca hadn't known he possessed. She followed, her heart pounding, already pulling out her phone to call for help, though help was 20 minutes away at best. They found the fence destroyed, not broken by accident, but deliberately cut. Wire cutters had sliced through the reinforced fencing in multiple places, creating gaping holes. And through those holes, at least a dozen animals had escaped into the woods beyond. No. Garrett was already moving along the fence line, his flashlight beam catching the reflective eyes of confused goats wandering in the darkness. The Montgomery twins. They're out here somewhere. And the Rodriguez kids. They're not used to wilderness. They'll panic. "I'm calling Wade," Rebecca said, her fingers already dialing. "Call Sarah, too. Some of these animals have medical conditions if they're out there all night in this cold." Garrett's voice cracked. He turned in a circle, trying to assess the damage, and Rebecca could see the devastation on his face. This wasn't just vandalism. This was an attack on the thing he loved most. Sheriff Brennan arrived first, his lights cutting through the darkness. Sarah pulled up minutes later, already pulling on a heavy coat and grabbing veterinary supplies. Within 30 minutes, they'd organized a search party. Wade had called in 2 deputies, and Marcus had arrived with his father and 3 other volunteers who'd seen the emergency text Rebecca had sent out. "Everyone pairs up," Wade instructed. "Nobody goes into those woods alone. You find an animal, you secure it and call for help. Don't try to herd them back yourself. Some of these animals are going to be scared and unpredictable." They spread out into the night, flashlight beams crisscrossing the darkness. Rebecca stayed with Garrett, watching him work with a focused intensity that bordered on frantic. He knew each animal's temperament, their fears, their likely behavior. He moved through the woods, calling their names, his voice gentle despite the urgency. "Holly, Hank, come on, babies, talk to me," a bleat answered from somewhere to the left. They found the Montgomery twins huddled together under a fallen log, both terrified but unharmed. Garrett coaxed them out with patience and soft words, then secured them with leads before moving on. It took 4 hours to find all the escaped animals. The last one, an elderly ewe named Pearl, the first animal Garrett had ever rescued, was discovered nearly a mile from the property, her bad leg making her unable to keep up with the others. Garrett carried her back himself, refusing help, his face grim with exhaustion and barely contained emotion. By 2 a.m., all the animals were accounted for and secured in the barn for observation. Sarah examined each one, finding minor cuts and scrapes but nothing life-threatening. The volunteers helped repair the temporary fencing, while Wade and his deputies documented the crime scene, photographing the deliberate cuts, collecting evidence. "This was professional," Wade said, examining the fence with his flashlight. "Clean cuts, strategic placement to maximize the number of escapes. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." "Henderson," Garrett said flatly. He was sitting on the ground beside Pearl's stall, his clothes torn from scrambling through underbrush, his scarred hands bleeding from a dozen small cuts. "You can't just accuse—" Wade started. "Who else?" Garrett's voice was raw. "Who else wants me gone badly enough to terrorize innocent animals? To put them at risk like this?" Wade's jaw tightened. "I'll investigate." But Garrett, without evidence, "Then find evidence." The words exploded from Garrett with such force that several animals startled. He took a shaky breath, trying to compose himself. "This was supposed to be safe. That's all I promised them, that they'd be safe here. And now—" His voice broke completely. Rebecca knelt beside him. "They're safe. We got them all back. They're okay. This time," Garrett whispered. "But what about next time? What if Wade hadn't come so fast? What if we hadn't found Pearl before hypothermia set in? What if Henderson decides to escalate even further?" He looked at Rebecca with eyes full of despair. How do I protect them from someone who has all the power and none of the scruples? It was Marcus who spoke up, surprising everyone. The teenager had been quiet all night, working hard, but saying little. Now he stepped forward, his young face set with determination. "You get evidence," Marcus said. "My uncle, he does security systems. He could set up cameras, motion sensors. Next time someone tries this, we'd have them on video. Security systems cost money we don't have," Garrett said. "So we fundraise again," Sarah interjected. "We make this public, show people what Henderson's willing to do. The community will help, and I'll increase patrols," Wade added. "I can't station someone here full-time, but I can make sure we drive by every few hours. Make it harder for anyone to try this again." Garrett looked around at all of them, these people who'd shown up in the middle of the night, who'd scrambled through dark woods, searching for animals they barely knew, who were offering solutions instead of sympathy. Rebecca could see the moment something shifted in his expression, a subtle change from despair to resolve. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, let's do it." The next morning, Rebecca posted photos of the vandalized fence and a carefully worded statement on the sanctuary's website. She didn't name Henderson. Wade had warned against that. But she laid out the facts: deliberate destruction of property, animals put at risk, clear evidence of targeted harassment. Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. The response was swift and overwhelming. Marcus's uncle arrived that afternoon with a van full of security equipment refusing payment. "Consider it a donation to the cause," he said, already surveying the property to determine camera placement. A local ranch supply company delivered reinforced fencing materials free of charge. The volunteer coordinator at the library, Alice Chen, organized a 24-hour watch schedule, people willing to take shifts, staying at the sanctuary, acting as night guards until better security was in place. But it was the email from Diane Foster that really changed the game. "Rebecca, I've been digging into Henderson's financial records. Public information only, but interesting patterns. He's over-leveraged. Bought 3 properties in the last year, using bank loans, with balloon payments coming due in 6 months. If he doesn't acquire and flip more land soon, he's facing potential bankruptcy. That coal property? It's not just about expansion. It might be about survival. Thought you should know. Diane." Rebecca showed the email to Wade in his office, away from potential listening ears. "If Henderson's desperate for that land, he's going to keep escalating," Wade said, his expression troubled. "Desperate men do desperate things, so we need to make it impossible for him to get it. Legally bulletproof." Rebecca pulled out a folder she'd been compiling. "I've been researching conservation easements. If Garrett places the property under one, it can't be sold or developed. It has to remain as animal sanctuary in perpetuity. It would make the land worthless to Henderson." Wade leaned back in his chair, considering. "That would work, but conservation easements are complicated. You need lawyers, appraisals, non-profit status verification. We have non-profit status. And I've been in contact with the Montana Land Trust. They're interested in partnering with us. They'd help with the legal work." Rebecca met Wade's eyes. "This could end it. If Henderson knows the land can never be what he needs it to be, he has no reason to keep attacking. Or it pushes him into doing something even more drastic as a last-ditch effort. That's why we need to move fast. Get the easement in place before he realizes what we're doing." Wade nodded slowly. "I'll keep investigating the fence cutting, and I'll make sure my deputies are visible around the property. If Henderson or his people try anything else, we'll catch them." He paused. "But Rebecca, be careful. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and that applies to men like Thomas Henderson, too." Over the next week, Rebecca worked 16-hour days coordinating the conservation easement. Lawyers from the Montana Land Trust reviewed documents. Appraisers assessed the property value. Sarah helped Garrett understand what the easement would mean: permanent protection for the sanctuary, but also permanent restrictions on what he could do with the land. "I'd never be able to sell it," Garrett said, reviewing the paperwork. "Even if I wanted to walk away someday, I couldn't. Is that a problem?" Rebecca asked. Garrett looked out at the pastures, where the animals grazed peacefully under the watch of volunteers. The security cameras Marcus's uncle had installed were barely visible, but omnipresent. The new fencing was stronger than before. The barn had a fresh coat of paint, courtesy of Lisa and Tom Cartwright. The sanctuary had been transformed from Garrett's private refuge into something larger, a community project, a symbol of resistance, a place that mattered to more people than just him. "No," he said finally, "I'm not going anywhere. This is home." The conservation easement was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca, Sarah, and Garrett stood in a lawyer's office in Great Falls, signing document after document, making it official. The Coles Second Chances Animal Sanctuary was now permanently protected land, unable to be sold or developed for any purpose other than animal welfare. "Congratulations," the lawyer said, shaking Garrett's scarred hand without flinching. "You've created something permanent, something that will outlast all of us." They celebrated with coffee at a nearby diner. Nothing fancy, just the three of them sitting in a booth, exhausted but relieved. Rebecca watched Garrett slowly relax, the tension he'd been carrying for months finally beginning to ease. "It's really over?" he asked. "Henderson can't touch us now?" "The legal avenue is closed," Rebecca confirmed. "The land has no value to him anymore. He'd be smarter to cut his losses and focus on other properties." "You think he'll accept that?" "I think he won't have a choice." But Rebecca underestimated Thomas Henderson's pride and his desperation. 2 days later, she was at the sanctuary helping Marcus clean water troughs when Sheriff Brennan's truck came speeding up the drive, lights flashing. Wade jumped out, his face grim. "Where's Garrett?" "In the barn. Why?" "What's wrong?" Wade was already moving. "Henderson just filed a lawsuit. He's claiming that Garrett's sanctuary violates county zoning laws that were updated last month, laws that specifically prohibit commercial animal operations within certain residential zones." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "But we're not commercial. We're a non-profit sanctuary. Henderson's lawyers are arguing that taking donations constitutes commercial activity, and the county board, which Henderson sits on, approved the zoning changes 3 weeks ago before the conservation easement was finalized." Wade's expression was furious. He set a trap. He knew about the easement, so he created a legal mechanism to shut you down anyway. If he can't buy the land, he'll make it illegal for Garrett to operate the sanctuary, force him to relocate the animals, which would effectively destroy everything you've built. They found Garrett in the barn, and Rebecca watched the hope drain from his face as Wade explained the situation. The lawsuit was scheduled for a hearing in 2 weeks. If the judge ruled in Henderson's favor, the sanctuary would have 30 days to cease operations and remove all animals from the property. "He can't do this," Garrett said, his voice hollow. "We did everything right. We followed every rule." "He changed the rules," Wade said grimly. "That's what men with power do when they can't win fairly." Rebecca's mind was already racing through options, possibilities, counter-strategies. There had to be a way to fight this. There had to be. Her phone rang. "Diane Foster, Rebecca, turn on the news." "Channel 4, now." Wade pulled out his phone, finding the local news station's live stream. And there, filling the screen, was Thomas Henderson's face, not smiling but serious and concerned. The picture of a responsible public servant. "Deeply regret that it's come to this," Henderson was saying to the assembled reporters. "But the law's clear. We cannot allow personal sympathy to override public safety and proper land use regulations. Mr. Cole's operation, while well-intentioned, has grown beyond what our zoning laws permit. The county has a responsibility to all its citizens, not just one man and his animals." "Commissioner Henderson," a reporter called out, "critics say you've been targeting Mr. Cole because he refused to sell you his property. How do you respond?" Henderson's expression turned to one of patient disappointment. "That's simply not true. This is about protecting our community's quality of life and ensuring that all property owners play by the same rules. I've tried to work with Mr. Cole, offered him assistance, but he's refused all reasonable compromise. Sometimes enforcement action is necessary no matter how unpleasant. The interview continued, but Rebecca had stopped listening. She was watching Henderson's performance, the careful positioning as reluctant enforcer rather than vindictive bully, the subtle implications that Garrett was unreasonable and uncooperative, the framing of himself as the defender of community standards. It was masterful, and it was working. Even the reporters seemed sympathetic to Henderson's position. "He's going to win," Garrett said quietly. "Isn't he? After everything, he's going to win." Rebecca looked at the man who'd saved 43 animals, who'd built something beautiful from the ruins of his old life, who'd finally learned to trust again, only to have it threatened by bureaucratic manipulation and legal warfare, and she made a decision. "No," she said firmly, "he's not. Because we're done playing defense. It's time to go on offense." "What do you mean?" Rebecca pulled out her phone, already scrolling through her contacts. "Henderson thinks he can hide behind county regulations and public relations. But what if we expose exactly what he's been doing? Not just to you, but to everyone. All the property owners Diane interviewed, all the people who've been too scared to speak up. What if we make this bigger than just one sanctuary?" "How?" Sarah asked. "We hold a press conference. We bring in every victim, every witness, every piece of evidence. We make this a story about corruption and abuse of power, not about zoning violations. And we do it before the hearing, so the judge has to consider the full context." Rebecca looked at Wade. "Can you help?" "Officially." Wade was quiet for a moment, and Rebecca could see him weighing his career against his conscience. Finally he nodded. "I'll testify to everything I've documented. The harassment, the pattern of complaints, all of it. Henderson might have the county board, but he doesn't have the truth." "Diane will cover it," Rebecca continued, already planning. "We'll invite every news outlet in the state. Make it impossible to ignore. And if it backfires," Garrett asked, "if we expose all this and still lose?" Rebecca met his eyes. "Then at least we'll lose fighting. On our terms, telling the truth, standing up for what's right. Isn't that better than just letting Henderson crush us in silence?" Garrett looked around his barn, at the animals he'd saved, at the structure he'd built with his own scarred hands, at the people who'd become his unexpected family. And Rebecca saw the moment he made his choice. "Okay," he said, "let's burn it all down." Not his sanctuary, Rebecca understood, but Henderson's carefully constructed facade. Sometimes she thought the only way to stop a bully was to expose him to the light, and they had 7 days to gather every bit of truth they could find. The real battle was about to begin. A press conference was held in the Crossfield Community Center on a cold November morning. Rebecca had expected maybe a dozen reporters. Instead, the room was packed. Local and state media, bloggers, even a crew from a national network that had been covering rural land rights issues. But what really filled the room were the people. Jim Patterson sat in the front row, next to Martha from the diner. Alice Chen had brought a group from the library. Marcus and his father were there, along with every volunteer from the sanctuary. And behind them, filling the remaining seats and standing along the walls, were faces Rebecca didn't recognize, people from across Montana who'd driven hours to show support. Thomas Henderson sat in the back corner, blanked by his lawyers, his expression confident. He thought this was a desperate move by desperate people. He thought he'd already won. He was about to learn otherwise. Garrett stood at the podium, and Rebecca watched him struggle with the attention of dozens of cameras pointed at his scarred face. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "My name is Garrett Cole. 7 years ago, I was a firefighter. I went into a burning building to save lives, and I came out looking like this." He gestured to his face without shame. "I lost everything, my career, my marriage, my sense of purpose. I came to Crossfield to disappear. Instead, I found something worth fighting for." He told his story simply, without embellishment. The first rescue, the growing operation, the care he'd learned to provide. And then he described the harassment, the offers to buy, the escalating pressure, the false complaints, the destroyed fence. "Someone in this room has spent a year trying to destroy what I've built," Garrett said, his eyes finding Henderson. "Not because I've done anything wrong, but because I refused to give him what he wanted. Then came the witnesses. Mark Sullivan described losing his horse rescue to mysterious problems. Jennifer Wu detailed the sudden regulatory issues that bankrupted her farm. 3 other former landowners told similar stories, all facing unexplained difficulties after refusing to sell to Henderson, all eventually forced out. Sheriff Brennan presented his documentation, years of patterns, complaints, coincidences that weren't coincidental at all. Diane Foster revealed her investigation into Henderson's finances, his over-leveraged properties, his desperate need for the coal land to stave off his own financial collapse. The evidence mounted like a prosecutorial case, each piece building on the last, until the picture was undeniable. Thomas Henderson had been systematically abusing his position as county commissioner to force property owners off land he wanted to acquire. Henderson's lawyers tried to object, to dismiss it as speculation and conspiracy theory. But the sheer volume of testimony, the consistency of the pattern, made their protests sound hollow. Then Rebecca stepped to the podium with one final piece of evidence, something Wade had uncovered just 2 days earlier through a records request. Security footage from a gas station near the sanctuary, time-stamped the night of the fence cutting. The video was grainy but clear enough. Derek Henderson, Thomas's son, purchasing wire cutters at 9 p.m., then driving in the direction of Garrett's property. "This isn't about zoning," Rebecca said, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had erupted. "This is about a powerful man who thinks the rules don't apply to him, who thinks he can terrorize people into submission, who thinks that nobody will stand up to him because they're too afraid of retaliation." She looked directly at Henderson. "But we're not afraid anymore." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions at Henderson, who tried to maintain his composure but was visibly shaken. His lawyers were scrambling, trying to manage the disaster unfolding around them. Camera flashes lit the room like lightning. In the chaos, Rebecca saw something that made her smile. County Supervisor Patricia Morales, Henderson's own colleague on the county board, standing and walking out of the room, her phone already to her ear. She was making calls, Rebecca realized. Important ones. The hearing that afternoon was anticlimactic. The judge, having watched the morning's press conference, immediately called for an ethics investigation into the zoning law changes. Henderson's lawsuit was dismissed pending the outcome of that investigation, and the county attorney, under pressure from Supervisor Morales and 2 other board members, announced a formal review of all property transactions involving the Henderson family over the past 5 years. Thomas Henderson's empire was crumbling in real time. 3 weeks later, Derek Henderson was charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. Thomas Henderson resigned from the county commission, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew the real reason: he was trying to avoid criminal charges of his own. The county board voted to rescind the zoning changes, acknowledging they'd been passed under false pretenses, and the sanctuary remained. Rebecca stood on Garrett's porch on a December morning, watching snow fall gently over the property. The animals were warm in their upgraded shelters, built with funds from a grant they'd received after the press conference. A new sign stood at the property entrance: Cole's Second Chances Animal Sanctuary, a forever home. Garrett emerged from the barn, Pearl following him like a faithful dog. The old ewe had barely left his side since the night she'd gotten lost in the woods. "Marcus just got accepted to the veterinary program at Montana State," Garrett said, a note of pride in his voice. "He's going to intern here during summers." "That's wonderful," Rebecca said. "He'll make an excellent vet. Sarah says I should apply too." "To the program?" Garrett's tone was uncertain. "She thinks with my experience here I'd have a shot." "You should do it," Rebecca said immediately. "You'd be incredible." "I'm 43 years old, Rebecca. And I look like someone who survived something terrible and became something better," Rebecca interrupted gently. "The world needs veterinarians who understand that healing isn't just medical, it's emotional. Who better to teach that than you?" Garrett smiled, that real smile that had become more frequent over the past months. When did you become such an optimist? When I met a scarred rancher who taught me that the things worth protecting are worth fighting for. Rebecca pulled an envelope from her pocket. Speaking of which, I'm transferring to the county office permanently. What? Margaret approved it. Crossfield needs a dedicated social worker, and I need to be somewhere I can actually make a difference. She gestured at the sanctuary. Besides, somebody has to make sure you fill out all those grant applications correctly. Garrett's expression turned serious. Rebecca, you don't have to upend your life for this place. I'm not doing it for the place, Rebecca said. I'm doing it for me. For the first time in my career, I feel like I'm actually helping people. Really helping. Not just shuffling papers and checking boxes. I'm not giving that up. A truck pulled into the driveway. Sarah's Jeep, followed by Lisa and Tom's pickup. The volunteers were arriving for the day shift, ready to feed and care for 43 animals who'd all been given second chances. Thank you, Garrett said quietly. For everything. For believing in this when nobody else did. I think you'll find a lot of people believe in it now, Rebecca replied. You just had to give them a chance to see it. As they walked toward the barn together, Pearl bleating contentedly beside them, Rebecca thought about how much had changed in just a few months. A place that had been one man's hiding spot had become a community's rallying point. A scarred firefighter who'd thought he was finished had become a teacher and advocate. And a burned-out social worker had rediscovered why she'd chosen this work in the first place. Henderson had tried to destroy them, and instead he'd forged them into something stronger than they'd been alone. You know what the best part is? Garrett asked as they entered the barn, where animals greeted them with familiar sounds. What? They really are safe now. All of them. That promise I made. I can actually keep it. Rebecca watched Garrett move among the animals he'd saved, speaking to each one, checking on their well-being with practiced care. The scars on his face and hands were still there, still visible, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they were simply part of his story, the chapters about loss and pain that made the chapters about healing and hope all the more meaningful. Sometimes, Rebecca thought, the most important battles weren't fought in courtrooms or county offices. They were fought in the quiet moments of caring for broken things, in the patient work of building something good, in the courage to stand up and say, this matters, and I won't let you take it away. Garrett Cole had fought that battle and won, not just for his animals, but for everyone who'd ever been told they weren't worthy, weren't capable, weren't enough, and that, Rebecca knew, was a victory. Worth every moment of the fight. The sanctuary gates would always be open to those who needed second chances, because everyone, human and animal, alike deserved the opportunity to prove that their scars were just the beginning of their story, not the end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.